co-host. Cool. Okay, right, guys. I'm just going to say a few words to kick this off. Then, both for people joining us for their first LJC event and people tuning in afterwards. If while I'm doing so, yeah, people can let other people in. That would be grand. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Barry Cranford. I'm the founder of the LJC. I'm not actually a developer myself. I'm a recruiter. I run a recruitment company called RecWorks. So what we're doing here, running a tech user group, our belief at RecWorks is that recruitment can be a force of good in the industry beyond just placing people into jobs, and specifically around mentoring and learning. So put simply, if people want to learn and people are happy to teach, then we're happy to make those connections. So we see our work as sitting somewhere between giving back to people that we have worked with and paying forward to people that we hope to work with at one point in the future. So a few examples of what we've done. We've organised now over 500 events for engineers, students, graduates, CTOs. We've done that across a number of different technical communities, and we've made over 2,000 personal introductions between mentors and mentees through the Meet a Mentor group. We've also given a lot of opportunities for people to step into the speaking world, and that's really what this is all about today. In fact, one of the biggest things that I've learned from my career and from working both in recruitment and in the LJC is the impact that getting into speaking can have on your career. The thing is, when you start speaking, you elevate yourself above other people, because not everyone does it, and in fact not a high percentage does it at all. So by elevating yourself both internally and externally, you can lead to new job offers, being headhunted, internal job promotions, and that kind of thing. You can lead to more choice in the work you get to do, which obviously leads to you being able to choose the stuff that you want to do and takes you closer to a career that you enjoy. But some of the other benefits that aren't maybe as obvious. In fact, Daniel's on the call. I heard Daniel and Abraham say this at an LJC conference. One of the best things that they got out of it was bringing you closer to these incredible people that share your passion and that really connect with what you're about. You'll also find, I'm sure Tricia can speak to this, that it inspires people to get involved, whether it's young people, underrepresented groups in the industry. You will draw people out that will see you as a role model. Personal development as well, communication and leadership skills. I could go on all day. It's a subject I'm particularly passionate about myself. But at the moment, we're keen to encourage a new diverse generation of speakers within the LJC and beyond. So this event is part of this new movement. So you're here, I think there's five, six, seven people that are here as mentors. Some of them I know have given their first talks at LJC and gone on to speak at probably every Java community in the world. So how I plan to run this, I've got some questions prepared that we collected from people that signed up. So I'm going to jump into those. But if anybody wants to say something, anyone has any questions once I've started, just jump in. You can raise your hand digitally or just jump in for any of the mentors. So without further ado, then I'm going to jump straight into my first question. This is aimed at anybody that wants to have a crack. So why speak? Why get into speaking? How has speaking, public speaking, conference speaking changed your life, and what motivates you to do it? So if you can handle any part of that question.
I'm reluctant to start because if I start, I won't stop. I mean, the short version is that, like, as Barry said, speaking at events, like, it completely changes your career. It's a complete, it's not just a case of like just leveling up once, it like levels you up way beyond where you were before. So there's just a whole bunch of opportunities, a whole bunch of things which come open to you if you start getting involved in speaking. Like Barry said, you can speak internally for your own organization at brown bags or like really short small groups with just your development team. That can really help improve your confidence in terms of like sharing knowledge and kind of figuring out like how good you are at explaining stuff, which is kind of helpful. I started that as well. I started speaking at the London Java User Group, doing lightning talks, and that's great because It's funny, actually, if you're an attendee of a user group, like I always got very nervous when I attended user groups because I didn't really know how to talk to people. I didn't know how to introduce myself. I didn't really know, like, I didn't know anyone there. Like, how do I go up to people? The weird thing is that you would think that presenting at a user group is much more nerve-wracking. It's not, because you go up, you speak in front of people, you've already prepared what you're going to say, you have something to say, and then people come up to you and they talk to you. So it actually becomes a lot easier to go to these big events and speak to people and make friends. And then from there, like from the London Java community, I made a bunch of friends, got a bunch of jobs, speak at a bunch of conferences, became a Java champion, and like, you know, I don't know what that was like the start of the story, really.
Thanks, Trish. Anybody else want to add to that on any impact it's had on your life or your career?
I'll chip in if you like, guys. So my first keynote actually was with Trish as well. So I got to give a shout out to everyone here. But that was kind of good intro there, Trish. For me, like the two things I learned early on in my career, there's no better way to understand something than to teach it. Right? I studied at university, and my professors, my mentors, said to me there, if you understand something and present it in a simple enough way that other folks understand it too, you have mastered that craft. So that, for me, that's been influential in all my sort of stuff I've done afterwards, I guess. And the second one is, even though many of us, I'm sure on the call, are techies, we're introverts at heart, I get exactly what Trish said. Like, the irony is, when you're on the stage, you're in control. So as an introvert, I find that quite empowering. And many of us, I'm sure, got into tech to avoid people. I know I did when I first started programming, right? But I've actually learned that whatever you do, communication is super, super important. And I've been lucky enough over the years to do roles from developer to CTO to, or everything basically, T-person, you know, I've done the thing. And whatever you do, communication is super, super important. And being able to communicate effectively in presentation format helps me with my writing, help me with my coding. It's all one and the same thing, a lot of these skills, being able to chunk up information, present it in a simple way. So for me, like, I started joining the dots when I started speaking. I was like, oh, this is going to help my writing. Oh, my writing is going to help my coding. And it was one of those, like Trisha's kind of alluded to, it's a positive, virtuous circle.
Great, thanks, Daniel.
Add to that, I can echo the kind of the career opportunities there that kind of arisen. I mean, I've written a couple of books. Neither of those opportunities I don't think would have happened if I hadn't done some public speaking. A lot of, you know, public training courses that I ran for a while. I've produced some courses for Pluralsight. Those are all things that are kind of opportunities that only really arose from having done some public speaking. And I think there's also a thing where probably a lot of people who are passionate about the tech industry are often have things that they find are frustrations or things which they would like to improve about the tech industry. And, you know, communicating that message is an opportunity for you to improve things, no matter what it is that your specific thing is that you would like to kind of improve about the tech industry, be it interpersonal, be it adoption of some particular technology, be it doing something that we all do on a regular day-to-day basis, but doing it better, like, you know, writing more maintainable tests or something. These are all opportunities to kind of help improve the industry, which is quite, so we're still quite young and we still have a lot of improvement to do, hopefully. But yeah, so I think those are all good reasons.
I would like to build on that, actually. I have seen this in action. Obviously, being a woman presenter helps. A lot of women come up to me and say, oh, it's very inspirational to see a woman technical person. So from a personal side, then it's useful. But from a technical point of view as well, like in terms of actual results in changing the industry, I've given 2 presentations where I have seen the impact the presentation I had on the technologies I use. One was around Java 9 stuff. So I was demoing Java 9 before it became live, and I was demoing a lot of early access stuff, specifically around JShell and things like that. And after the developers on Java 9 saw my presentation, they saw some of the pain points I had that I didn't even realize were pain points. I was just working around them, as you do as a developer. And they came back to me and said, we fixed that. That's not a problem anymore. We've changed JShell because of your presentation. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. And the same thing happened with IntelliJ IDEA. Now, I work for JetBrains and I work with the people who create IntelliJ IDEA. But I usually just go out and talk to people about what IntelliJ IDEA does. I had a presentation which was, it was called Refactoring to Java 8. and it used the IntelliJ IDEA features for refactoring existing code to using the Streams API. And so I had real existing code that I was using IntelliJ IDEA to refactor. And the guy who's responsible for those refactorings in IntelliJ IDEA saw that presentation and made a bunch of changes to the refactoring so that I didn't have to do the manual steps that I had to do during the presentation. And the funny thing was, I gave that presentation several times throughout the year, and every time I gave the presentation, I was like, oh, this just works now. Okay. And there would be like new features every single time that I gave that presentation. So it's really helpful for people who work on tools or languages or whatever to really see developers using them, and they go, oh, right, well, I can fix that. I can do something about that.
That's amazing. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you sharing that. So I'm going to take it that all the people on this call now are now buzzing and gonna hit me up to speak at our events. We are actually running lightning talk events, if you haven't seen it on the LJC, every 2 weeks now as part of this initiative to give new speakers a chance to practice. So please get in touch. I think we had 8 at the last one. We're going to limit it to 5 next time to keep it all within time, but let me know. Okay, so 2 of the biggest questions that we had, we asked people for questions when they signed up, and we had loads. 2 of the biggest questions that came up for this one and that come up in the group that we started are around topic selection and around nerves. So I'm going to start with topic selection. So some examples of the questions here. How do you find things that are interesting to speak about? How do I know if people will be interested in the subject of my talk? And again, it comes the same question from a number of different angles. Anyone? I know, Jim, we talked about this a little bit this week already, didn't we? Does anyone want to? Do you want to elaborate maybe on what we were saying on the call?
Yes, I think we were talking about a couple of things earlier in the week. I think the main one was that you don't necessarily have to have something that's brand new that you think no one else will know about in order to speak about it. And maybe speaking on some of the topics that are already pre-existing, or the things that you think other people may not find interesting, or actually what people are looking for. It within work, if you've just gone through one particular pain point or problem and you share that, or at a user group or a conference, probably there's others that are going through that same thing. So I think with topic selection, it doesn't have to be brand new. I think we also discussed a little bit on and it's recorded as well, so you can go back to it if people want to. But there's also the kind of, it's good to do like a practice run in something like a lightning talk that Barry just mentioned, to just see whether the topic's going to work or not. It's like if you were writing some code, do a small test, see if it's going to work, and if it does, then extend it out further. You don't have to necessarily go and create an hour-long talk to begin with, or maybe create a small code prototype that you can then use as something that you would then talk to. I mean, Daniel and I have been talking about a book that we're going to be working on, and we're talking about exactly the same thing for writing a chapter. That we're going to try and look at who the persona is that's going to be about to work on that or read that particular chapter. What kind of examples would demonstrate and sort of start to forge a narrative. And all of the chapters that we're planning to write in the book, we're actually planning to write them as talks first, because that will give you the same kind of again, story that you want to get in your talk, is that you want to get in with your writing. So I think the main thing to do is just get started. And it's really kind of easy to say, oh, I'll wait until I get the perfect topic, but sometimes it's worth just pick the first thing that comes into your mind and do it.
Can I just riff on that one and just say one thing? So I mentor a bunch of folks like my job and other things as well. And people always say to me, oh, I can never find a topic or I don't know enough, exactly what Jim said, basically. And one of the things I found in my career, if people are familiar with the Dreyfus model of learning, like you start at a novice and then you move up the way to kind of expert. And the irony is when you're an expert in a field, it's really hard to communicate with the novices because you've internalized all these things. Yeah, like on this call, we've got a bunch of Java wizards here. And actually the folks here on this call are probably pretty good at chatting to novices. But many people I work with in my career, like they do presentations on stuff and they're experts, and even I'm like, what? And someone who's just coming into their career would never stand a chance of learning from that. The sort of that beginner's mindset, if you're actually in that space and you're learning something, you're probably one of the best people to teach it, because you've gone through the pain of, oh, I'm not quite sure how that works, or what's the mental model I need there? And you're in that beginner's mindset, you're in that novice mindset. And we've all got skills all the time at different points of the Dreyfus model. I'm a beginner in, Kubernetes, but I'm an expert in Java, or that kind of stuff. So I think there's always something you can teach, and you will probably do a really good job of teaching the basics of something if you're new to it.
So yeah, I would like to kind of expand on that as well. I've helped to run a bunch of user group events for MongoDB and for Java, and the most in-demand topics are beginner's guide to getting started with. If you think about it, there's way more people who don't know about something than do know about something. So doing a beginner's guide to, especially one of the things that's even more interesting is if something now appears to be extremely popular, but like you're only just starting to get used to it. So let's take something like cloud stuff, Kubernetes, Docker, something like that, which is kind of fairly mainstream now. And you're thinking, oh crap, I don't really know that much about this, and I'm just starting to learn it now. Imagine how many other people out there are in exactly the same situation. You need to give the kind of like, I'm late to the party, what do I need to know type presentation, which is a beginner's guide to. So they're really, really popular. All of our introduction type talks at the Java user group in Seville and the MongoDB user group, they're always the most popular one. However, I do have a slight caveat to this. So I think the getting started stuff is good, and almost anyone can do a getting started type talk. So it's a good thing to begin with as a beginner. There is a slight caveat, which is that it's sad but true, but a lot of women techies have to prove themselves a lot more than men techies. And if, as a women techie, you're doing Java 101, people will think that you're a student, even if you have 10 years of experience, 20 years of experience as a Java developer. Now, there's another way that as women techies, or like this applies to everybody anyway, but as women techies, what can I do which will stop people thinking that I'm a beginner? Well, what is it that I do know? Even I don't have to be an expert, like, you know, major concurrency, garbage collector, ninja thing. I don't have to be like expert, but what is it I do in my day job every single day that I know I'm pretty good at? And that is where you can start. And that's, in some ways, it's better than a beginner's guide to, because you're not a beginner. You're doing like, let's take something like Spring. We tend to work within something like the Spring framework, which is huge. And every day you'll be doing something within Spring. You'll be doing, I don't know, like creating new Spring MVC pages for whatever, or, you know, something that you think is very mundane and boring. That's the sort of thing that lots of other developers are just trying to get started with, or want to see an alternative way of doing stuff. So you can do a really solid, like, this is the problem that I solve with my code every day. And then you can feel good about that because you're like, I do this, I know this, I've got this, right? And you just share it with other people who are kind of interested. And you don't have to worry about, well, maybe they don't know about these things, or maybe they don't care about these things. They will come and watch that talk if that's what they're interested in. So they're there to listen, and they're there on your side.
I was going to say something that a lot of people think about talks is that it has to be something brand new or super exciting. And definitely, I think that the way a lot of kind of the buzz in our industry works, there's a lot of emphasis placed on new or exciting early adopter technologies. But in practice, if you're giving a talk about some new technology that's in the early stage of its adoption, you aren't necessarily going to help people that much because it's in the early stages of adoption. And I think that it's always worth thinking about things that you're very familiar with, often old topics. I go back to some of the talks I've given at Java conferences, some things which are both popular and kind of well rated were kind of talks on things like generics. When I remember giving a whole series of talks on Java generics, and it was well over 10 years since the actual generics in the language had changed in any way meaningful in this code. But there was still so much, you know, misunderstanding, confusion, issues. It was a poorly understood topic area, something that people hit a lot. There are things like that where I think a lot of people don't necessarily pick them up as being obvious talk topics, but they can often be very good topics to give on kind of fundamental things that people do or touch on a regular basis, where there's kind of common misunderstanding or better ways of doing things that aren't necessarily well adopted.
There's another type of talk which is kind of easy to give, and that's my opinion on. No one can correct you on your opinion on. So we've been talking about mostly technical topics here, but I saw a friend of mine give a very effective talk on my experience getting started as a DevOps developer. And she gave it to mostly ops people, and she was a developer, and she was saying, this stuff is difficult for me because I am a developer and I don't understand these words that you use. And so she gave a very educational and interesting talk about how hard it was for her to do a particular thing. And it was very, very well received. And I love giving opinion type talks as well, like why code reviews suck, like career advice for programmers, which is not well researched. It's basically my experiences in the industry. And people will sometimes try to correct you on your opinion, but you can just ignore them because your opinion is your opinion and you're completely allowed to have an opinion on something.
Love that. I love that. Sorry, Matthew. Did you have something?
I would just like say I really like the way of thinking about it where you split up talks by kind of genre, like X for beginners or like I'm an expert in X. And I just want to add one more that I've really enjoyed several talks in the past of like, we tried X and it just didn't work. And everyone's on your side, they want you to succeed, but it just doesn't. And those talks can be very funny and educational and engaging.
Yeah, there's a lot of microservice talks going around like that at the moment.
I like that. I like that. Right, I'm just going to have one more from Caesar. Then, did you have something to add? And then I want to move on to the nerves part of it.
For me, I just wanted to add, because the question was about what's an interesting topic, and I think interesting is a half subjective and half objective. So, you know, some topic might be objectively more interesting, but I think as a speaker, and I can set up from a speaker and an attendee perspective, the more you are interested in your topic, I think some of it leaks out to the audience. So if you talk about something that you're really passionate about, I think people will be interested because just, you know, seeing you being so, like, yeah, guys, really want this cool stuff. So I think for me, I would say pick something that you find interesting. Don't be like, okay, what should I pick? Oh yeah, that's cool. I'll do something like that. I think it's best to pick something that you personally, because if you're interested, you will find the time to work on it. You'll find the time to do the research.
Yeah, 100%. We had a guy on the last Lightning Talks, Bruno Schroeder, who spoke on Gentoo Linux, and he was speaking about this in terms of philosophy and poetry. Had a Latin spirit to him, and he kept talking about it. It was even I was wanting to check it out afterwards, and I don't know anything about it. So, okay, moving on. Then I'm gonna talk about nerves now, which is the second most common thing. I'm interested to know of the speakers, the experienced speakers here. Firstly, did you ever get nervous when you got started? Because everybody that seems to think about this, we have people that are terrified of the idea of starting to talk. So were you nervous at the beginning? And do you still get nervous? And if so, do you have any techniques for how to handle it?
I really want to take this first because I gave, sorry everybody. I was on, the short answer is yes, I still get nervous. I was on a virtual presentation on Wednesday and I was shitting myself, okay? I was the most nervous I've been for a long time. And it was, some of you have seen it, it's the Java 25th birthday panel presentation. And I'm there in a presentation with Brian Getz, Mark Reinhold, you know, these are like the names in Java. They created Java. George Saab, he's like VP of like everything. You know, these are big names inside Oracle. I've met all of these people individually. I know I have some sort of personal relationship with all of them, but I was so scared about being like arrayed side by side with these giants in the industry. And it was not a difficult presentation either because it's a 90-minute talk. We all had preset questions. I only had to answer 3 questions. I knew what my answers were because I'd already run through it. So it's really as easy a talk as you could have. And I was still extremely nervous for not like just beforehand, but for like 3 days beforehand. And it depends a little bit. There are like this presentation I'm not so nervous about because the LJC and my friends are here and, you know, and I just hop on and say hi. But I'm still a little bit nervous. I'm a bit nervous about jumping in and talking all over other people and saying what I want to say without listening to other people. So of course you're still going to get nervous. And if you don't get nervous, then you're probably not going to give a great talk anyway. I've spoken to a bunch of presenters about this particular topic, and every single one of them has said the talks where I wasn't nervous was the talk where I performed the worst. I didn't have that energy. I didn't have that motivation. I didn't have that flair, that vibe. So even if you've given a talk a bunch of times before, you are probably going to be nervous. And so that leads me on to, this is a good thing. I had a coach a while back and he said, I think this was before I started presenting. It was about the same time I started presenting professionally. And he said, what you can do with nerves is nervousness feels a bit like excitement. It's the same sort of fluttery butterflies in your stomach thing. So if you can fool yourself into thinking that you're excited about it instead of nervous. That will allow you to channel that energy in a way which is very positive instead of crippling you and worrying about everyone looking at you.
So I chip in about like one thing I was going to say, like, so it's that imposter syndrome type thing as well. And I remember, so I've been lucky enough to help out at the QCon conferences, and I'll mention the name actually because I think he'd be cool with me mentioning this. So Randy Shoup, yeah, he's like ex eBay, ex Google, WeWork, Stitch Fix. The guy's like a legend in our industry, yeah. Super polished presenter, keynoted at everything, and he was doing this quite personal talk, and like I was hanging out backstage with him, and he said, "I've got to do my thing," yeah, and I was like, fine, sure thing. And basically he puts on his tunes, like I can't remember the words, like some rock music, and he's like bumping away. He gets down on the floor, starts doing press ups. Yeah. And I was like, hang on, this is Randy Shoup, keynote legend, super nervous before a normal QCon talk, and he's doing push ups and listening to music. I was like, if he's cool with that, I'm cool with that. Yeah. As in, like, and I'm not, there's a couple of the names I won't mention, but as in, everyone gets nervous. Totally echo Trish's point about my worst talks are the ones where I didn't care enough to some point, and like Cesar mentioned, that is in when you are, you know, you're a bit blasé or you don't perhaps care about the topic, it does unfortunately leak through. I think nerves are completely fine, to be expected, and recognize that even the folks you see, like I'm sure even Steve Jobs at some point got a bit nervous, right? Even the people, they're super polished, they're super well rehearsed, but nerves are completely natural. I think if you look back evolutionary purposes, the only reason like people were going to be all looking at you one time is you're about to get eaten by a dinosaur or something, yeah? So like, that's what I think about it. So when everyone's looking at me like 1,000 pair of eyes on the stage looking at me, I'm like, where's the dinosaur? Where's the tiger? Yeah, evolutionarily. So I'm like, that's completely natural. I like Trish's excitement pitch there as well.
Any techniques from anyone on how to deal with the nerves that comes up with obviously the pre-event stuff there that you're talking about, Dan? But any other techniques from anyone? Anyone's there?
I was going to say, yeah, obviously echo these points. Especially when you start speaking, super nervous. Even when you're kind of debuting a new talk or it's an uncomfortable environment, I think it's always very reasonable to be nervous. I think Trish is totally right about trying to use it as a way of being very energized in your talk, being very active in your talk. I find the thing that works really effectively for resolving nerves is to start speaking. Because once you start your talk, your brain is focused on, you know, what your actual content is and how you're conveying your message and actually discussing things. And I find that is super effective. Like I would get very nervous before talks. Once you actually start talking, I'm not nervous because I'm too busy thinking about talking to be nervous about talking. So it sounds like that's not something necessarily too useful from a preparatory perspective, but it's one of those things that, you know, once you've started, you don't need to worry about that. It's only like the 10 minutes where you're standing up on stage waiting for the timer to hit 0 for you to start speaking that's actually a nerve-wracking thing. Yeah, I think there's also a thing, I mean, there's a chemical thing as well, like, so drinking coffee before your talk is a way of helping you get more energized and excited, but obviously does massively increase anxiety levels there. So how you want to play that balance is kind of up to you. Yeah,
I think that, and that leads on to something that Daniel alluded to a bit, which is these pre-talk rituals can really help you. Certainly in the very early days, I set up a bunch of rituals in terms of like, well, there's a few things. One, preparation helps you to be less nervous. So I do practice my talks. I do very much practice my live demos and figure out everything, certainly for live demos, which are fraught with danger, figure out what could go wrong and have backup plans. And that will help address some of my nerves. And if it's just a slide type talk, I just present it a bunch of times, practice it a few times. And I'm always more nervous during practice than I am in the real thing. Like Richard says, once you're on stage, you just got to do it. You don't stumble over your words, you just talk. So practice helps alleviate the nerves, but immediately beforehand, those sort of like usually I would say the hour before the talk in particular, you need to set up a set of routines so that you free your mind and it's not just going round and round and round and worrying about it. So things like in the early days, for example, Richard was talking about coffee. I would not allow myself to have coffee like 4 hours before the talk because I'm far too jittery already. So no coffee. I often wouldn't eat because it would make me feel sick. I would have to like gently graze before the day. So it depends when your talk is, which kind of messes you up a bit. I used to have a lot of talks straight after lunchtime, which isn't so bad because you just miss lunch and then you eat straight away. But if it's going to be later on in the day, you have to like graze a little bit with your food. Make sure you go to the bathroom. Make sure if you want, try the power poses thing. The power poses thing can help. Mindfulness meditation, whatever it is, but have a routine, a ritual, and do it beforehand, and that will help calm your nerves a little bit. I don't do it so much now. I don't need it so much now, but at the beginning, it's very helpful.
I was going to say as well, I think there's a lot of things you mentioned there around practice and prepping, but another aspect of practice and prepping is also like having things sort of written down that you know you can go back to in your talk, like speaker's notes on slides, or for example, if you've got a live coding demo, knowing that you've got something like a piece of paper next to you or something that's like, oh, these are the things I need to do, even if you never read them. And in my experience, 95% of the time, you never refer to these things, but you know that they're there in case you get stuck, or you're just like, oh shoot, what am I actually meant to talk about next? You've got a thing that you can refer to. I mean, hopefully you never need to refer to it, but it is there, which is, I think, very good from a psychology and a nerves point of view.
Yeah, I think it's kind of figuring out what you think is going to make you nervous. I think the only way you find that out is by giving a couple of talks, like to maybe some trusted people to begin with. I think that's really interesting, that point. At the beginning, even now, whenever you're on stage and you're kind of taking those couple of breaths before you start speaking, and then you start, and then it's like you kind of, the way I kind of dealt with it is I focus on the speed of how I'm about to talk, because when I'm nervous, I will just talk really quickly. So I just concentrate on like my own, I guess, like trying to get my own pacing to begin with, so that then that's what conveys through the rest of the talk. There's also this weird thing, I don't know if the other speakers get this as well, where sometimes you've been presenting for about 10 minutes and you don't realize, you've been so focused on what you're saying that you're not sure what you've just been talking about just in the last couple of sentences. Because it's kind of an odd one. You get really into a groove of things and things kind of settle down. I found once, like, I looked at my Apple Watch afterwards, and when I first stood up to start speaking, my heart rate spiked from about, I think my resting heart rate is about 58, and it went to 140 just standing up to start speaking. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, that's pretty interesting. You find you're controlling quite a lot of emotions as you get going, and it could be all these things about, oh, is this right? So the preparation helps. Do I have a backup if something goes wrong? And like Richard says, you don't often need them, but it's good to have them. And you know, things will still happen that's unexpected. At QCon, the front of the lectern fell off as I was giving my presentation, and it's kind of funny because things like that you almost just laugh at, and it does spike you, but you carry on and you get through it. So I think starting off with some friendly people. And like Trish says, like talking to this group is really easy for me now because I know most of you, and I feel quite confident. But it's definitely not the same when you go to either a new conference or even just a new location or a new venue. Like that can also be something that you sort of see some people going around and touching the walls beforehand to get a feel for the room and that kind of thing. It can be, those rituals, it can be quite nerve-wracking.
It's so interesting. I think it's so important that that new speakers here, that even keynote speakers and hugely important people and experienced still go through this. I remember when I started at Toastmasters, and one of the, I can't remember what they were, but one of the top people in this Toastmasters group said, oh, I still get nervous before every presentation. I just couldn't believe that somebody that was so experienced still before every presentation got nervous. So I think it's one of those things that's always going to be there. One thing I'm just going to add to what you guys were saying there, with these lightning talks, I feel like I'm just plugging it the whole time, and I'm not intending to, but and with Zoom. So before I used to open every single LJC event, everything the night before, I wouldn't sleep properly. I mean, I had to stand up and give a minute at the beginning, and it's horrendous. But moving that to Zoom, it's like the difference. Giving a full conference talk or a full meetup talk is like going straight into a freezing cold pool. Whereas doing a lightning talk is like easing in gradually. And doing a lightning talk on Zoom is like easing in even more gradually. So it's just the perfect way to get started. And there's so many things that you'll learn from just starting to do it, that then when you go on to your full conference talks, it will be much easier and more natural. I personally feel anyway. I don't know if anybody would disagree on lightning talks being a good step into this and a good way to understand the nerves.
I started with a lightning talk. Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Trish. I think lightning talks are a great way of starting for getting things going. I'm not sure about the Zoom situation. Like, I feel like the first time I gave kind of talks through an online presentation medium, it was super weird the first time you do it. Like, you get no feedback. You feel like you're just giving a talk into a computer. I know that sounds like it's not super helpful at the moment when there's lockdown going on, but I think it's worth doing these things to say, if you can't meet people face to face, to try and get some of your friends or co-workers to have a Zoom call, and you can at least see their face on the Zoom call whilst you're giving your talk. And at least that way, the first time you run it through, you get some feedback and see, you know, how people feel, because like normally you can kind of just see the audience and see what things work, if there are jokes in there, whether they work or not, whether people are kind of following things, nodding along, whether they're just like staring at their laptops, face illuminated by the screen, and you know that's a bit boring or whatever. I think that feedback's really valuable and really hard to get sometimes with webinar things. So I would definitely try and do a Zoom call with people you know, where you can get more feedback like the first time you run a talk or getting into it.
I would echo the thing about webinars specifically, because webinars are super weird. Like the webinars I give, it's not even a camera, so it's just literally slides on the screen or code on the screen, and me talking into, like you said, into the black void. You've got nothing. If you've got the chat window open, you might see some chat. It's very, very, very weird. And even when I started doing webinars at JetBrains, I'd already been presenting for like 3-4 years, and I hated it. It was very, very difficult. The Zoom thing is very different because, like you say, you can see the faces, you get the nods, and you get the human contact. I do want to reiterate that lightning talks are a really good way to start. I don't know, are you doing 15-minute lightning talks?
At the moment, we're doing either 5 minutes with 2 minutes of questions, or 7 minute.
Okay, that's perfect. I mean, that's perfect. Yeah. Like 50 minutes is quite difficult because you got to fill it with like at least 3 things. 5 minutes, you have in a 5-minute talk, you have one concept you want to get across. And when you're nervous about it, you've got to think it's only 5 minutes. It'll be over in 5 minutes, and then you're done. So it's a really good way to get started.
I think the other thing is, you know, talking about like my presentations and getting feedback from people. It probably won't matter for a little while, but what I always find is that's quite good is I quite like it when Daniel's in my talks, because I know how he reacts to stuff that I say. So planting him in the front row is a good way of doing that, and I can see him doing the same now on Zoom. And I think, you know, if you go to an audience you don't know, there we go. You go to an audience that you don't know, and you find that person who reacts to some of the stuff in a similar way, so you can kind of, you know, you can get some cues. And actually, whenever I'm sitting in a presentation, I'm usually sat there going like this, and that's partly because you help other presenters, because you know that that's what you want. That's what they would want to see. Like you see sometimes presenters looking for, I guess, confirmation or reassurance. So yeah, I agree with having Zoom. I think webinars are really difficult. I did one on Graal for the LJC a couple of months ago, and that was quite tough because you can't see anyone, and you just feel like you're talking into the computer with no response. But yeah.
Yeah, I think we've stopped doing the webinars now for that exact reason. I didn't like it. I'm talking, I can't see anyone. I like this. I can see everyone. And as you say, Daniel's thumbs, the highlight.
But right back at Jim, because like Jim was at I think it was in New York last year or something. Jim was in the front row with his buddies, like and just sort of nodding along. So that was kind of nice. One thing I would say is the webinar stuff has prepared me for when I've done a couple of talks. I remember the first time it ever happened is in New York at the O'Reilly SACON conference, where I was on the keynote stage, and the lights were so bright I couldn't see anyone, and that freaked me out. I wasn't doing a keynote; I was doing a normal talk, but it was on the keynote stage. And I remember getting up on the stage, looking down, and like it was tables, like people ran tables, and I couldn't see anyone. And I had a bit of a 5-minute freak out there. I was like, oh, how's this going to go? And that was actually one of my least favorite talks, because I was trying to do a few jokes, to Richard's point, couldn't see if they landed. I heard an odd murmur, but I thought, is that someone grumbling? Were they laughing? You know, and it was really hard to key off people. But doing a few more webinars now, I've sort of got the hang of it. And it almost comes back to my to something we were saying earlier. One of my things I do is I script the first 5 minutes really well. So and I really practice that first 5 minutes, and then I could that gets me over that sort of hump of I usually try and get one perhaps joke or funny thing in there, and then I can relax into these things. And even if I don't get that feedback, like if I've got that first 5 minutes done, that helps me a lot. It was I remember I can almost see it now in New York, where I was like, oh my God, can't see anyone. And I think half prepared my first 5 minutes, but that was something I really emphasized in the future is, to Richard's point, get talking, the nerves just disappear. And you always get that, your AV cable won't connect, or you can't see the audience, some randomness at the beginning of your talk. If you've got that first 5 minutes scripted, that's my cheat to hurdle over all these random things that pop up.
Great advice. We had somebody on yesterday, actually, just who similar. I spoke to her afterwards, Chital Thacker, who spoke to the London CTOs, and she said that she gets nervous. Again, you wouldn't know it. Beautiful speaker. But she said at the beginning of her presentation, she has like 5 or 10 kind of rapid fire slides, and they're like a funny picture with one line on it. And she said that's her way to blend into the talk. So that rather than one slide with loads of things and be like, shit, they're not interested, they don't care, she's kind of got another one and another one. So yeah, all these little techniques, they're great tips. I'm going to move on to another question. This was a specific question that we had submitted, so I'll read it out and then I'll pop it on the chat there. So let's assume that a conference is in half a year. I would like to give a talk regarding a particular framework or tool that we are using in our setup. How I should prepare the talk or abstract, keeping in mind that the company or community that owns this tool might publish its new version. Should I consider that while preparing the abstract? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got thoughts. There's a few things. Writing an abstract is a skill in its own right. Early on, I didn't feel comfortable writing the abstract without writing the talk, because I wasn't sure what the abstract would be. But early on, you're not sure whether your presentation is going to be accepted or not. So it's probably going to be a massive waste of time to create a presentation that you never give, or you only give once or twice. So I do not recommend doing that, even if it feels like the right thing to do. An abstract should be, so there's a few things. Conference attendees don't read the abstract. They just don't care. They read the title. So get it in the title. And the program committee, who decides whether your talk is going in the conference, they do read your abstract. If you have an option to put in additional information specifically for the program committee, that's where you can say things like, I don't know, like this will be demoing version 3.4.5, and if a new version comes out, I won't have a chance to do that in time, or something like that, whatever. So you can put, I highly recommend putting specific information to the program committee if it's allowed in the call for papers. The abstract can just be fairly general. So, for example, I've got a Spring Boot one, and which I created with Josh Long, and Josh is like an expert at these sorts of things. It's basically like, yeah, learn how to create a reactive Spring Boot application live before your very eyes. And that's it. You don't have to put version numbers in it. Well, actually, we talked about Spring Framework 5, I think, because that came in with reactive. But then it doesn't matter if it's 5.0.1 or 5.2. It's that, like, you just know you're going to cover the broad brush functionality, which applies to all of those things. So yeah, just abstracts, keep them nice and broad. Definitely don't pin anything in the abstract or title to a very specific version. Talk about something more general. So let's say it's Spring. You just talk about how reactive programming works inside Spring. That won't change very much from year to year. So yeah, keep it nice and general.
I just add, don't worry if it does happen. So if you want to see examples of this, watch any AWS reInvent talk. Amazon are famous for being tight-lipped. They do a bunch of stuff at the keynotes and they destroy half of the talks, yeah, because everyone's like, oh, I'm demoing this, which has been completely obsolete now by the new release made public this morning. So if you want to just watch any reInvent video, you'll find that. It happened to me at DockerCon. I was talking about CI/CD with Docker and Java, and they announced something about like a new ways of building in the keynote, and I just up front, I actually, two things. I up front said, hey, I didn't get to see this new build stuff they had, so apologies, my stuff is using what's out there already. I put a single slide, I actually took a picture of the new announcement, the keynote. So I put a picture in my slide deck saying, if you want to know more, these are the presenters that talked about this new feature. And I also thought, because it's being recorded, I thought this is actually going to be useful for people that haven't got access to the latest Docker. They're going to be still struggling like I did as well. So I've been there personally. I've seen other people go through it. It happens. It's up to you whether you want to frame your talk. They do say, never start a talk by apologizing. I think that's somewhat right. Don't say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm nervous, or I'm sorry. If you can help it, don't do that, because it does frame the audience in a slightly negative light sometimes. But again, I've done it, so like I'm a hypocrite here, right? I've often got up on stage and said I'm nervous or whatever. But it happens to the best of us. Like that one, it did suck at DockerCon, but I was like, whatever.
And you, like you say, that you think about the pace of change of technology inside enterprise applications, like someone's using your version of whatever it is and will be using it for a long period of time. So it really doesn't matter. In fact, I highly recommend not covering the latest and greatest. When I was covering early access version of Java 9, the year leading up to Java 9 being released, it was an absolute nightmare because it was changing every month. And every month I had to rework my presentation. I had to rework the examples. And I just said, I am never doing that again. And of course, no one moved to Java 9. So no one cares about that stuff. The only people who cared about that was that Oracle was giving them good publicity around Java 9. I created, after years worth of work, I created a brand new course, which I recorded on the day Java 9 came out, and it was released within weeks. And then about migrating to Java 9, which I thought was going to be a course which will net me money for the next 3 years. About a month after it was released, Oracle said, oh, we're going to release Java every 6 months from now on. And I was like, screw you. What a bunch of assholes. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to swear, but I was very, very annoyed. So yeah, I really recommend not pinning yourself to the latest and greatest.
It's probably good you didn't say that in the keynote the other day, Trish.
Okay, cool. One other point, and this is something I know next to nothing about actually. So I'm quite experienced speaking to a lot of you guys about getting started. But what does the other end look like? This event was from getting started to giving keynotes. So I know several of you have given keynotes. So if you've got conference speakers that are looking to get to that next level, or you've got people that are getting started that are thinking, yeah, by the end of next year, that's what I'd like to be doing. How do you prepare for that? How do you move into that? And any thoughts or advice on that area?
You have to ask. You have to ask to give keynote presentations. This is something that I kind of learned the hard way. I knew I was pretty good at presenting, and I knew I was keynote standard, and it was still another couple of years before I got asked to give a keynote. And I was like, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I getting keynotes? But then I spoke to a bunch of like experienced people like Dan North and stuff, and they were like, you got to ask people for their keynote. You got to tell them you're ready. And I spoke to Angie Jones from Twitter, and I noticed that she's got international keynote speaker on her Twitter bio. And I was like, yes, that's what I need to put on my bio, so people come to me and say, I want you to do a keynote. And I get invited to so many conferences now that I started saying only last year, I'm like, I'm only coming to your conference if I'm given a keynote, because I don't want to spend 23 hours traveling to San Francisco for an hour-long presentation. I'm not going to do that.
Any other advice? Anyone else? Anything else that can be done, Dan?
I think from a skill set point of view, recognize the keynote is very different. So I'm still working. I've actually got the book here, funny enough, somewhere. I'm working on my storytelling at the moment. So technical talks, like Trish mentioned, like coding, like Trish and Josh Long are my kind of heroes in this space. Getting in front of a terminal, that's a skill set. That is. I do the kind of thought leadery problem type talks quite well. I think that's kind of where my thing. But then the keynotes I've done have been more about storytelling, because they're more. Keynotes tend to be more generic, or the audience is wider, I should say. So the best ones I've done, the ones I've enjoyed the most, are where I've got a few chuckles, a few people nodding along, a few people like really enjoying the story. I've done a few overly technical type things, and people know your audience, I guess, but people haven't always enjoyed them as much. So I think the key things I suppose there really is knowing your audience. Like QCon audience want to be story told, they want to be motivated. KubeCon audience they actually want technical stuff, for example. So know your audience, but then recognize that keynotes you often have to go a bit higher level. Like Trish and I did our keynote together at Devox UK, wasn't it, several years ago. I remember chatting with Trish, I chatted with Simon Brown at the time, got some ideas of him, and we did keep it quite high level, Trish, didn't we? We talked about teamwork, we talked about our experience of leadership, and that actually, I think, went down quite well at the Devox crowd, because we weren't talking about the specifics of Java or whatever, where some of the audience there might not have been into Java. They might have been there for JavaScript, for example. So I think it's recognize storytelling, recognize the keynotes are different, not better, not worse, they're just different from a organization and learning and kind of crafting point of view.
I'd like to follow up on that, actually. I completely agree. The thing about a keynote presentation is that even at a keynote presentation at a Java audience, a Java conference, you can assume a Java audience, but generally speaking, the keynote presentation will be to a bunch of different developers using different technologies, often like even leaders, architects, non-technical type people. So there's two things. One, your audience is much broader. It's everyone who goes to the conference. And two, it's generally forced. Like, people will be sat there. They haven't elected to come to your talk. They are sat there being inflicted with your talk, which is why the storytelling thing, like Daniel and I did, is quite good, because everyone likes to listen to a good story, even if they're just laughing at how stupid you were in the story. But when I was asked to give a fairly technical keynote at Go to Berlin. That was my first keynote, actually. And I was asked to give a kind of live Cody type keynote. GoTo is an agile-ish conference, usually has a Java track, so it's kind of Java-y, but it's not very Java-y, and it didn't get great ratings because it was a very technical keynote at a agile type conference. That's the other thing. Like, if your talks are rated, which they usually are, especially at the QCons and the GoTos and so forth, a keynote presentation will generally receive lower marks than your normal presentation, precisely because your audience is much broader. They have not elected to come to your keynote. They did not choose it. So you'll generally get like 60 to 70 in terms of greens or I liked, as opposed to 80 to 90 or whatever it is you normally get. You're going to lose like 20% of your likes, and that's fine. And that's the other thing you've got to get used to. There will be someone who puts a red in the box for your talk, at least, and that's fine. It's not for them. It's okay. It's not for them. It's for everybody else. Don't focus on the ones who didn't like it. Like 60% of the audience thought it was fine. That's great.
It's got to be said as well that people give bad feedback for terrible reasons. Like, you'll get a red dot because the room was too cold or something like that. And unless the organizer of the event is curating the feedback in some way, I tend to just ignore all of it. Or like scan through for anything actionable and disregard the rest, like very quickly, because it's often like pretty low value unless it's been like well arranged by the event.
I was going to say my book recommendation. I can't do a webinar talk or whatever, or some kind of Zoom thing without recommending at least one book. Stories That Stick, really good book. Yeah, like I got given this one, I think, when I was in Boston with my DataWire crew, and yeah, Kindra Hall, fantastic.
Great, thanks guys. If anyone has any questions now, I think we have 7 minutes left. Thank you, by the way, everyone. I did say you didn't have to stay for the whole thing, and I know that you all have, so I really appreciate that. If anyone has any questions, chuck them in the chat. I've got one more that I wanted to ask, which came through on from the signups, which was: do you script or bullet point your talking points, or improvise based on what the screen or slide is showing at the time? I know, Richard, you mentioned having some presenter notes on there earlier, but is that something that everybody does, has presenter notes, or do you improvise? Do you learn through practice? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I tend to improvise and speak on the cuff a lot. I personally really dislike talks that sound too polished, or it's not polished. Polish is good, but like that don't sound like the authentic voice of a real person. And sometimes you can see that. I think it's something you're talking about keynotes just now. Sometimes seeing keynotes as well, that people have like super formal, not human mode of speaking. So I much prefer, to speak as myself. But the notes are kind of there to make sure that you still have points that you can hit in case you forget. So before I would ever give a talk, I'd do a practice run. I'd make sure I know what I want to say in terms of content, but not pick the specific stream of words to use, if you see what I mean.
I do exactly the same as Richard. So I often script the first 2 to 5 minutes of a talk. Like that's my trick basically, to make sure it's tight, to make sure I don't waffle on the intro, and make sure I get my joke in early to relax me and hopefully the audience too. And I mainly use my bullet points. And I know you shouldn't do that, and we got told off doing that in academia even, but you shouldn't use bullet points to sort of nudge you, but that's generally what I do. I try to have 3 to 5 bullet points on a slide, and if I sort of get halfway through and go, what was I talking about, I can look at the slide. And occasionally on tricky names or things I always forget, I put them in the speaker notes. Sometimes I can't pronounce someone's name and I phonetically spell it, because that's people's names are important, right? You always get the names right if you can. And then I just forget like acronyms sometimes, like STRIDE when I was talking about threat modeling, so put the acronyms in there. But I think you do find your rhythm. I scripted a lot more up front, and if I'm doing training courses online, like Pluralsight stuff, I script that because that actually saves me time. I find otherwise you're constantly redoing the video. But in a live situation, I like to freestyle as much as possible too. It's more authentic, to Richard's point, I think, about I've been to academic conferences where people will literally read their papers. There's no value in that. I can read your paper fast and you can speak it. You know what I mean? Being completely blunt. So I don't see it much in IT, but in the academic crowd, I stopped going to some of the conferences because people just used to read off scripts, and there's not much value in that, in my opinion, too.
I would like to echo the authenticity side of things, which is that every speaker does things differently, and you have to, the key to being a good speaker is figuring out what works for you. So you have already heard from Richard and Daniel that they've kind of evolved their styles a little bit over time. Anyway, I was the same. I used to put lots of things in my speaker notes so I didn't forget them. And over time now, I just put in things like, what year did this feature come in? Which version of Java was it? Something very specific that I'm going to forget. But I liked to have my slides nice and clean, so I would have to have a lot of stuff in my presenter notes to make myself feel more comfortable. I don't really do that now. I'm much more confident now about what I'm going to talk about. I've usually given the talk a bunch of times before. For my screencast, though, when I'm doing my YouTube videos, I script that, and I read the narration, and I script it, and I edit it in, because it's about saving time. But really, everything about presenting is all about finding what makes you comfortable. So I remember speaking to, who was it? Someone who's quite famous in the community, and he was saying, like from the LJC actually, and he was saying, I know him and he's a funny guy, but he doesn't put jokes in his talks because he finds it awkward. He finds that if people don't laugh, it trips him up. He finds he doesn't have the right flow to be funny. So he's just said to himself, he's not funny in his talks because it doesn't work for him. For me, if I was not allowed to be funny in my talks, I wouldn't be able to talk. Like, I'm always looking on each slide, on each demo, on each thing. I'm always looking at the thing I'm going to take the mickey out of, or the thing I'm going to laugh about myself about, because that makes me relax. So it's all about finding what's your comfort zone. And again, try not to mess with that. So people worry about, do I speak too quickly? Do I speak too slowly? Am I worried about when I take a breath? I used to worry about stopping, as you can tell by the way I speak. I used to worry about stopping, reading my presenter notes, and that's kind of fine. Stop, take a breath, read the notes, carry on. And just don't worry about these things, just be yourself.
Great, thanks guys. I'm just going to bring in one final question then before I close this, which was from Carsten, and it was actually submitted as well. Do you have 2 sets of slides, one for presentation with less text and a handout with more text?
I would do that as a consultant. I did do that as a consultant. What I do to save myself a bunch of time, and so I don't have to explain everything in a talk, is I have the slides, I have a website with all of the other, I have a web page, a blog post normally, with all the other stuff. So my talks are usually very heavily researched because they're usually like what's coming in Java, and I have to read a load about how to present that stuff. So I use Pocket to bookmark all my links of everything I looked at, and I dump all of those links in a fairly unstructured form into a blog post. And so like all of the further reading, all of the stuff I don't want to take the time to explain during the presentation, I dump all of that on a blog post. I'll often, because I'm a developer advocate as well, so I have a bit more time to do these sorts of things too, I will write throughout the year. I usually give the same presentation throughout the year. Throughout the year, I will be writing blog posts, articles, further information, videos, maybe explanatory videos about particular pieces. And I dump all of that on the blog post as well. So I won't have a handout to give people, and my slides are fairly meaningless as especially for live demos. But I do have a central place for you to go to find out more information.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, guys, that's 29. So I'm going to say a massive thank you again to everyone, all of the mentors that were happy to share something on this call and log on, especially those that logged in last minute. Really appreciate that. Again, anyone that wants to talk, we run these events. Speak to me, speak to Dom Carlo. If we get enough demand, we'll start doing them weekly. At the moment, we're doing them fortnightly. And yeah, I hope you've all walked away with something from this. Please do let me know. Very, very keen. We're organising more and more Q&A sessions like this with speakers, and we're desperate really to really do what we can to make a difference. So yeah, thanks everyone. And Tuesday, Trish, do you want to say anything about Tuesday? Jim, you guys are both on the panel, aren't you? And Richard.
Yeah, something's happening on Tuesday. I'll be there.
Jim, do you want to give it a better pitch than that?
I was really glad when Trish said something, to be honest. Yeah, so I think we're planning to have like a bit of a panel. So it's Java's 25th birthday. I think it's tomorrow, although the event was earlier in the week. So next week, a suggestion of Ben Evans, that we get together and share some thoughts about Java, where it's been, where it's gone, probably share some LJC memories from Java 1 and a few other things, I would imagine, as well. So yeah, that's I think that's a plan for next Tuesday. I don't think there's I'm hosting that event. Yeah, I need to come up with some questions to make sure that you guys are all put in the right mindset. That's a really good reminder.
We are on it at the LJC. We know what is happening. We are all over this.
Professional speakers.
It's just in time organisation.
Wow.
Absolutely.
But Jim, we're gonna. I don't. Is it say lunchtime? Is it lunchtime? But I'm gonna have to bring my red wine because it's just not the same if I'm not drinking red wine with you guys.
Amen. Do it. Well, there you go. Come Tuesday, bring your wine if you want, and listen to Jim. Hopefully, you'll have some questions then. Speak to everyone. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend, and I'll catch you all soon.